Hello, and thank you for joining us at Continual, the never-ending convention. My name is Jean Marie Ward, and I'll be your host for today's panel on the narrative art of ghost tours. With me to discuss the role storytelling plays in our favorite tourist activity are Leanna Renee Hieber, Alledria Hurt, Gail Martin, Laura Resnick, and Barb Stewart. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you.
Hey.
We're so glad you could join us. To get us started, I'm going to ask you all to introduce yourselves. And I'm going to do this in alphabetical order because the way I see people is not the way they necessarily appear on other screens. So, Leanna.
Hello, everyone. My name is Leanna Renee Hieber, and I am an author of 13 ghost-filled novels. Beginning with the Spectral City series is my latest series. So my latest novel, A Summoning of Souls, just came out a few weeks ago. So this is my brand new baby. And I'm also a ghost tour guide in New York City. So I give ghost tours through, my favorite part of Manhattan is the Greenwich Village area because some of my favorite ghost stories are in that area. So that's my specialty. And I also lead tours through Central Park as well. And I've also been ghost tour guide around the country. I'm also an actress as well. So anytime that I've been in an area doing theater, I always try to find a little side way in which I can get into the ghost tour industry as well, because it is one of my favorite things. So I look forward to hearing everyone's strategies for their respective ghost tours.
Oh, cool. I'm looking forward to that too, by the way. Alledria?
Hi, I'm Alledria Hurt, and I am an author of 20 books at this point with a background in tour guide in Savannah, Georgia. And I actually also train ghost hosts.
You train the ghosts or the hosts?
I train the ghost hosts. That's what we call ourselves. We are the ghost hosts.
I love it. I love it. Great. Gail?
Hi, I'm Gail Martin and Morgan Bryce. As Gail, I write epic fantasy, urban fantasy, steampunk, and more. And as Morgan, I write urban fantasy, male paranormal, romance, and they are all chock full of ghosts. Somewhere around 40 books, and I've got 12 current series and some that have concluded, but they're all full of ghosts, vengeful ghosts, restless spirits, mediums, psychics, and all the rest. So I am here as a writer and consumer of ghost tours because they're one of my favorite activities.
Cool. Laura?
Hi, I'm Laura Resnick. I'm a fantasy writer. I've written epic fantasy, the Solarian trilogy, lots of short stories, and I write the Esther Diamond urban fantasy series set in New York City, and it's mostly comedy. And I also work part-time as a tour guide here in the Cincinnati area where I live. And mostly I do underground tours, which are not ghost tours. We actually go underneath the city for these tours. But in the season, which is September, October, the ghost season, I also help out on the haunted tours that we do. I do the Covington is Haunted tour. Covington is across the river from Cincinnati. It's mostly a 19th century city. And I help out with the Queen City is Haunted tour, which my friend and coworker Barb Stewart is the head guide on. We both work for a small local company called American Legacy Tours.
Cool. And Barbara Stewart is here with us today. Barbara, would you please give us your introduction?
Sure. My name is Barbara Stewart, like you said, like you already heard, and I am the lead ghost guide here in Cincinnati for the Queen City is Haunted tour. Cincinnati, Ohio, and a little part of Cincinnati called Over the Rhine because of the Germans that immigrated here in the early 1800s.
It's pretty far over the Rhine if you consider where the Rhine is.
Well, yes and no.
Okay.
Well, the area was bordered by a canal, And because of the German immigrants here on this side of the canal was actually nicknamed after the Rhine River. And to come into this area, you crossed over that canal, so you're going over the Rhine, and that's how we got our name. So
Cool.
not too far.
You know, I had a series of questions that were all lined up, and then you showed up. And unlike the rest of us who are in the middle of our homes, even with a background, you're in an actual haunted building.
I am.
So can we open this, because we're all ghost tour aficionados, as well as, well, in my case and Gail's case, junkies, ghost tour junkies, you know, and everyone else actually gives the tours. Could you give us a little tour of this wonderful haunted property you're currently in? Just
I would love to. I would love to. This is the building I'm currently in is in Over the Rhine, and this is the Emery Theater. The Emery Theater opened in 1912. It was part of the Mechanics Institute, and it was basically funded by a woman named Mary Emery. And it became part of the University of Cincinnati for a short period of time. And now it is acquired by a private owner who is allowing us to come into the building and do haunted investigations. So that is where we are.
And how long has it been abandoned, Barbara?
I'm not 100% sure when it was last used. I want to say probably in 1980s. It's in pretty bad disrepair at this point in time. So they're in the process of fixing it back up.
Does it have some stories attached?
As far as haunted stories, not a whole lot of haunted. There was a, before this was the Emery Theater, there was another building on the site called Eagle Ironworks. And they had a really bad fire in the mid-1800s. And then not long after that, it was torn down, and then the theater and part of the Mechanics Institute was built on top of that area. The Eagle Ironworks are credited with coming up with the first commercial steam fire engine. So the first one to be sold here in Cincinnati. We were the first paid fire department in the country, paid fire department rather than volunteers. So that's part of its history here. But this is the Emery Theater.
It's beautiful. And hey, it wouldn't be a theater without a couple ghosts, and I'm sure you're going to find them. How did you get in? How did you get introduced to the idea of ghost tours? This is going to be a question for everybody, but since we're there, how did you get into this?
I like a good story. I liked a good ghost tour. My very first probably ghost tour was probably in St. Augustine at the lighthouse. I had seen Ghost Hunters, and I had seen the episode where the shadow kind of peeks over the top of the railing.
Yeah.
So my first probably real tour was down there, and this is kind of bad to say, but my husband and I snuck off the tour, sort of. We were allowed. We did have permission, and we actually snuck up inside the lighthouse, and we sat about halfway up where they had sat to film the person looking over the railing. And we were basically in the lighthouse all by ourselves that first night. So that was kind of my introductory to the ghost tours. Other than I've had several experiences, one including, I truly believe that I saw Seth Bullock in the Bullock Hotel out in Deadwood one day. So before I was a true believer. So that's my beginnings.
That's a good beginning. I think so. Laura, you know, you also write fiction, and I imagine that in some things the people cross back from the other world. So how did you get involved in the business of ghost tours?
Well, I was trying to remember your previous question, like what was my introduction to ghost tours, and I honestly can't remember. I remember for years wanting to go on a ghost tour. We didn't have them locally, so I'd want to go and I would travel, but whoever I was traveling with, friends, family, whatever, would always be, no, that's so naff, Laura, that's so geeky, we're not going to do that. And we'd not go. Till finally I had friends I was able to talk into this, and I believe it might have been the first ghost tour I ever went on, probably about 20 years ago in, a small town in Kentucky. Is it Bardstown? I think it's Bardstown on the Whiskey Trail. And the ghost hunter there, and apparently she's quite a well-known ghost hunter. She's written some books. She's been on TV a few times. She was just the cute as a button. Just this tiny little old Kentucky lady with this very rich accent and this very high voice. She was kind of like everybody's granny, and she was so adorable. And it was, I don't know, I guess you see ghost hunters on TV, they're always kind of these big, husky, screamy guys. And she was just this delightful little old lady. She couldn't have been 5 feet tall. And I just love that being so different from how ghost hunters are sort of depicted in fiction. They always look like Hugh Jackman or something. So I think that more than anything got me interested. And she was not the greatest storyteller, in all honesty.
Oh dear.
And my friends were bored and insisted we leave the tour early. But yeah, I think that was kind of what got me interested. And then we started developing, people started developing ghost tours here in Cincinnati. I went out on some paranormal investigations with a local ghost hunter named Dan Smith, who does some tours. And then one night, just on a whim, I saw that this new walking tour company in Over the Rhine called American Legacy Tours was doing a Queen City is Haunted tour. And it was going to be in about 20 minutes. And I could just make it if I, left right now. So I did. And I went on that tour, and it was fantastic. The stories were great. The sights were great. I wound up going on all their tours and then finally applied for a job there.
Oh, cool. Okay. Gail, what was your first introduction to the world of ghost tours?
Well, I've loved ghost stories since I was a kid and picked up a book of regional ghost stories when we were on vacation in the Adirondacks. And I read that book until the cover fell off. And that just got me hooked on the idea that not only were there stories that varied by place, of course there would be because people live in different places, but that there were also themes to some of the recurring ghost stories like Crybaby Bridge and Woman in White and Phantom Hitchhiker and all of those. And I was hooked. It took me a little longer to get other people on board with going. I think I dragged my parents on a ghost tour in Salem, Massachusetts when I was in high school. I know I got Larry to go on one early on in Williamsburg. But at this point now, there's sort of a de facto part of every vacation. We've done them all around the world, from Rome to London to Dublin, up and down the East Coast, and even scoped out a few battle scenes for books in cemeteries. We warned the guide first. But yeah, cemeteries and ghost tours, they're my jam.
Cool. And they play a role in, the ghosts play a big role in your fiction, as you said. Alledria, what was your introduction, and, how did you get involved in giving these tours and in one of the most beautiful and romantically haunted cities in the country,
Actually,
Savannah, Georgia?
I have one of the oddest ways that I got involved. I saw an ad in the paper that we have that's called The Connect. It is a small paper that is done throughout Savannah and the surrounding region, and they were looking for actors. And I was like, at that time, I had never acted before. I was currently unemployed. And I was just like, what's the worst that could happen? So I applied. And when I got there and talked to the gentleman who was running the show, he told me what we were doing, and he asked me if I was okay with that. And I said, I'm absolutely fine with that. We're going to go do this thing. And then about 4 weeks later, after being put through my paces, because I had never acted before, I was released onto my first trolley tour. And I have been hooked ever since.
Do trolleys and ghosts go together?
Yes, especially down in Savannah. Down in Savannah, trolleys and ghosts. It makes for a different kind of tour because, of course, you're kind of trapped. You're a captive audience, and we are moving at about 10 miles an hour past these places. but you can still occasionally catch things on your phone that make you want to go back and go, wait, did I actually see that in the window? Wait. Was there a face in the side of that wall?
I've been
oh my
on.
God, I got orbs.
They're good.
I got orbs. Yeah.
Cool. Leanna, you are an actress, but you've also been goth, I think, for a long time. What was your first introduction to ghost tours, and how did you wind up in the business?
Well, it was sort of inevitable. I've been interested in spooky stuff since I was a child. The first paperback book that I remember being devoted to was a small chapter book of 13 ghost stories. And I, much like Gail described, like the cover fell off. I had read it so much as a child. I quickly, a very helpful teacher gave me an anthology of Edgar Allan Poe. I was drawn to history as much as I was to ghosts, because I also had some paranormal experiences early in my life, and I knew that there was just more than we could see with our eyes. There was more to life, more, in heaven and earth, as the line goes, than is dreamt of in your philosophy. For me, history, ghosts, and performance were all three combined very early in my life. So all of those interests propelled me to being a performer, to being a writer, and then of course to pursuing being a tour guide, because we all need side jobs when you have a life in the arts and you're between shows. Having a side job where you can schedule some tours as a tour guide is it's a great job to have as a performer as well as a writer. So I knew that I wanted to write historical novels. So I knew that the history that I would be learning while I was trying to learn the tour would be doubly useful as a writer. And I've always tried to write stories that have some aspect of where I'm living at the time. So I grew up not far from where Barbara is now. I grew up in rural Ohio, north of Cincinnati. So Cincinnati has a great rich history. So I learned a lot about that, bounced around the regional theater circuit. I spent about 5 years in Minneapolis, St. Paul area, and was a ghost tour guide there. And then when I moved to New York, I knew that I wanted to write books set in New York. And so I knew that my side job would be a tour guide, because I had a lot of experience at this point. And so my first New York City tour guide job was not ideal. It was on the red double-decker buses. And those are hell for tour guides, because it's a volume of traffic, and a lot of times people are just using them for transport and they really don't care about the history. Being a walking tour guide, I have a lot more time to spend with the people who are ready to listen to the history. So I had a better experience with working as a walking tour guide in New York. And so I really have always tried to use my interest in the paranormal, my interest in history, and my interest and calling as a performer. I don't really know that I could take any one of these out of what my career has been. They're all entirely inextricable. My first experience of putting ghost tour guides into a book was when I traveled to London for research for my first novel series, the Strangely Beautiful saga. And I took London ghost walks there. And I actually befriended one of the main, Richard Jones, one of the greatest ghost tour guides in London, befriended him and learned all these wonderful real ghost stories that I then put into my Ghostbuster in Victorian London saga, so that the ghost stories I was using for my Ghostbusters to relate to as their usual haunts were actually London spirits, so that it wasn't something I needed to make up. I wanted to honor the ghostly legacy of that area. And then I've tried to do that ever since in every subsequent novel.
Oh,
Jean Marie. Yeah, just a quick comment. It's interesting how people come into doing the ghost tours. I went on a tour in New Orleans, and it wasn't my first ghost tour. I'd been on the academic ones and the very serious historical ones, but I decided I wanted to do one of the performance-based ones just for fun. And this one said that it hit vampires, voodoo, ghosts, scandals. You know, it was a like 5-in-1 tour, so I didn't know what to expect. I get there and there's this lovely woman who's fully in costume, and she knocks it out of the park. She is a fantastic oral storyteller. Her whole body language, she performs this as we go through the French Quarter. She's got us all in the palm of her hands. I mean, she's just amazing. And when it's all over, we're walking back together, back toward Café du Monde so I can get my taxi. And I said, so I'm really curious, how did you get into this? And I said, you know, I'm expecting theater major, fine arts major. You know, she said, yeah, I majored in economics at Duke University. And I don't know whether this was her side gig or whether gave it up, threw the economics out the window and went for the ghost tour. But man, all that personality and talent is totally wasted if she's an economist somewhere, because she was awesome.
Which segues into my next question. What actually makes a good ghost tour? You know, you were saying the engagement and the storytelling capability and the personality of the guide. You know, what are your thoughts on that, Gail? And I'll get to everybody, don't worry. So.
I love it when I hear a story that I haven't heard before, that you know, is something that I haven't already read somewhere. I love it when I get the feeling that the person is respectful toward the stories, whether or not they, you know, actually believe in the hereafter. They are at least respectful and they're not making fun of the situation. And I love it when they have good factual grounding. Like I said, I've been on performative ones. I've been on straight academic, let's just talk the facts. And they're both good in their own way. But I want someone that I can tell loves doing what they're doing and can't wait to share the scoop with us and see what happens.
Okay. Laura, what, you know, in your opinion, because you've been on these two as well as giving them, what makes a good tour, you know, as a consumer of ghost tours?
Well, I was just thinking about what Leanna had said about being on a bus. I'm like, wow, that would be so hard to make that work as a ghost tour. That would be a huge challenge, because I think since I do like 4 or 5 of our tours at the company, and it's we do very good tours, a lot of research, a lot of practice, a lot of background reading, really interesting sites. I think the ghost tours are harder, the haunted tours, because when I do say like the historical walking tours, the underground tours, the Brookwood pottery tours, I'm giving lots of factual information, and it's pretty interesting. And I'm telling true stories that are pretty interesting. And if you have any interest in history or this sort of thing, you're going to be pretty engaged. I think the haunted tours require this whole other level, because you've got to create atmosphere. These are ghost stories. You know, we do include a lot of history in our haunted tours, and Barb can certainly address a lot of that. But they've got to be atmospheric, because ultimately you're telling ghost stories on these tours. And I know that on nights when I've been out there doing haunted tours, it, you know, can be great when it's kind of dark and a little foggy and kind of spooky, and the city's kind of quiet, and you know, you can give people some chills. But there are nights when there's loud music playing and a lot of traffic and a concert's letting out. Patrick, who is sitting off screen with Barbara tonight at the theater, he and I did a tour once, a Covington Haunted Tour. I'm sure Patrick remembers this, where across the river, as we were doing one of our stories, suddenly the ballpark just exploded with fireworks because the Reds had won a game. Really kills the atmosphere. So I think, you know, you need really good material, but the kind of step up for the, I think what Gail was saying is accurate too. You know, you've got to be respectful of the material. I myself am a skeptic, but I don't bring skepticism to the stories that I tell when I'm guiding a haunted tour. I want to make it as exciting and interesting and also, you know, spooky and atmospheric as possible. And that's, I think, so you need good material, you need a guide who's respectful, who's a good storyteller, and that's really how we get hired at the tour company. At my interview, I had to prove I was a good storyteller. That's really what we're at. We have to prove we're loud as well, but good storyteller. But I think the big challenge of the haunted tours, on top of all the things you have to do well, and I do lots of walking tours everywhere I go, the thing you have to do really well on a haunted tour, better than any other kind of tour, is atmosphere. And sometimes you've got a lot of challenges around creating the sort of atmosphere a haunted tour needs. When the atmosphere is right, and I agree with Leanna, it's way easier on a walking tour than it would be on a bus or something like that. Yeah, then it's a really great tour. And I think that's really important. And it's also why people enjoy doing haunted tours after dark. It's much harder. I mean, we do daytime tours, but it's much harder to create that atmosphere, I think, when the sun's still shining.
I've got to jump in since both you and Leanna have mentioned the bus tours, because we did one in Dublin called the Gravediggers Tour, and it was on a double-decker bus that had blackout curtains on all the windows. And we didn't completely realize when we signed up for it that the bus became a movable stage. And the tour guides popped up in costume. I don't know where they came. I swear they came out of the floor. Ran through the bus. They had all kinds of sound effects and special effects, and the lights would go out, and you'd see, visions of things. And you were on a moving theater for 2 hours. And then you ended up at the old bar, the old pub that had as its back wall, the wall to Dublin's oldest cemetery, where the gravediggers would push a shovel through an opening and they'd put a pint on it and shove it back through the opening, after a long night of digging graves. So bus tours can be very dramatic, but that took some extra setup.
Oh, yeah. And money.
Yeah, definitely money. Alledria, what, in your opinion, makes a good tour? You're on the moving tours as well. You were on those trolley tours.
Yeah,
and
I do.
You had a lot of the same challenges.
Yeah, part of it is you have to, especially on the trolley tour, because I'm holding a microphone in one hand, I'm holding on with the other, and I'm surfing the entire time, because I recognize that I'm moving, but I have to keep everybody else kind of unaware of the fact that I know I'm moving, almost like I'm floating.
Mm-hmm.
And they're like,
a ghost.
Yeah, well, my persona for the tour is a reformed serial killer.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I am a reformed serial killer who follows Hannibal Lecter's rules. I eat the rude. Free range rude, we call them. So we're not going to have any problems on my tour, now are we?
Do you come equipped with peace-bonded weaponry?
Nope, never. I have never ever had to show anybody that I might actually have a weapon.
I love it. I love it. So,
but what makes a tour great? From the training aspect of it, I always tell people you have to have a strong why. Mm-hmm. You have to have a strong why. If you come into this job just wanting to do it for the money, I'm sorry, there are other things you could do that pay better. Mm-hmm. So you want to come into it understanding that you love the job, because there are going to be nights when your mic don't work, the trolley breaks down, your guests are unruly, everything that can go wrong will go wrong. And you're just like, if your why isn't strong enough, you'll quit. Mm-hmm. But by the same token, if your why is strong enough, you learn the skills necessary to be a good guide. And that's the part that I think is the most important, especially from a training aspect, is you have to be teachable, and you have to be not only willing to go the mile, you have to go the extra mile to make it work. And it's awesome when it does.
And is that your why?
Oh, I love this job. I love this job. I love training people to do the job. I think it is the best. It is the most fun I have ever had that I get paid to do. Cool. And that is, I mean, I have now done semi-professional theater, and I come back to doing ghost tours. I've been in and out of this for the last decade, and I've done ghost tours for Savannah for that entire time, on and off. And it has just been, it is the most fun I can have for money.
If I could just jump in, something Alledria said reminded me of, I was on the Queen City is Haunted tour a couple of years ago, and we had a family there with a couple of young children, like 9 or 10 years old. We don't get that many children on our tours because our tours are a lot of talking, and kids want something a little bit more action-oriented, I guess. But I remember we're kind of doing our go stop to stop and, you know, wearing our costumes and all. And this 9-year-old boy, he tugs on my skirt and he says, "So do you really believe in this? Or you just did it for the money?" It's a little kid. And I was like, we don't really make that much money. Nobody's in this for the money, kid. I make more than a fast food worker, and that's about it.
Kids, no filters, none. But you got to watch out for those little old ladies, especially the ones from, say, Kentucky or Tennessee. They ain't got no filters either. So anyway, Leanna, what, in your opinion, you know, as a consumer as well as a person who gives the tours, makes for a good or a great ghost tour?
Well, I think echoing a lot of my colleagues here, passion, caring about the material, that honestly, if your audience knows that you care and that you're passionate about your material, it can forgive any flub, it can forgive any, you know, mistake or any other atmospheric thing that may or may not happen. When you're giving a tour in New York City, you have no idea what's going to happen. And you're going to get people who are going to talk back to you and who are going to try to scare your group or anything like that. We try to keep our tours very, very absent of any kind of shtick, because New York has plenty of its own. So we basically are ourselves. We're not playing a character. So we are ourselves telling the stories, and respect has been used. That word is very important. And many of my colleagues here have talked about the respect for the material, respect for the dead, respect for the fact that history is not kind nor pleasant to many different types of people, especially anyone in the margins. And so we're very open about those things. We're very open about hard history, about things that are complicated, about things that still speak to issues that we have today. So we're not interested in sort of softballing the more difficult parts of history. We're also not interested in making it more lascivious or making it more illicit or any of the, we're not interested in sort of tarting it up, as it were.
You don't have to. If you get the right story, it does it itself.
It's right there. So I think for us, it's like, if you're committed to telling the story and in that moment with your audience, also connecting with your audience. One of the ways I try to bridge a gap between those who are skeptics and those who are believers, and I basically, you know, say all are welcome. I don't need to tell anybody what to believe. And I'm very open with people about what my beliefs are, and they can take it or leave it. But I'm certainly not trying to lecture anyone, but I really focus on the buildings that we're in front of, and the way that the different atmosphere that the buildings that we're in front of create. So that way the people who are skeptics they know they can take away thoughts about the architectural details, about the energy of the building, about how it looks, how it feels. That's something that's tactile, that's separate from the stories, but it's entwined with the stories, because these aren't just about the ghosts, they're also about the haunted buildings themselves, the sites themselves. So being very site specific about those tours is helpful, because that's right there in front of you. So I try to kind of always be casting the moments back to the building itself and having a dialogue with the building itself as well as with my audience, and then providing room between the stops to talk with my audience, because I found that, like, and I'm interested to hear if my colleagues feel the same way, I've sort of become a bit of a paranormal chaplain, where people want to tell me their stories because they want someone to tell them that they're not crazy. I had this adorable young boy, he was from the South, who'd come up, and he sort of drew me aside to tell me about seeing his grandmother in their living room. And I just said, oh, all right. How do you feel about her being there? And he said how glad he was to see her and how much he missed her, and that she was this loving presence. And I said, well, then she's just still watching out over you. And I could see the dad was sort of behind that. It kind of wanted, to send his son up to talk to me about this. And especially, that's at a tricky age where, people, a lot of times kids are not believed for what they see or what they hear. And it was just this kind of amazing circumstance where I just kind of let him have that moment and believed him. And it turned it around into this lovely family story for them that was about something positive. And I also said, you might need to be careful about where you do say these stories, because some people will believe you and some people won't. And so you decide for yourself who gets to hear these stories and who you might want to save that, because they won't believe it. So it's an interesting thing that I found that people are bringing me their stories too. And I just try to also then treat that with penultimate, like with as much respect as I can give to that moment, without trying to make it about something else.
Okay. Alledria and Laura, have you found the same thing on your tours? And Barbara as well. I'm deliberately saving you for last because I know you're a head guide, and I want to hear your perspective from a management standpoint as well as from a guiding standpoint. But for you, Barbara, for you, Alledria, for you, Laura, have you had this experience on your tours where people wanted to talk about their own stories in the context of your tours?
I actually invite people to. At the end of the tour, when we are getting ready to let everybody go, I ask, would you like to share? Mm-hmm. Is there a story in your family that you would like to share? And I will tell them. I tell, if there isn't a story on the trolley, I tell the story of my mother's house, which is actually haunted. Mm-hmm. And they're like, most of the time people react to that with, wait, your mom's house is haunted? I'm like, yeah, I spent the first 15 years of being in America in a haunted house.
Yeah. I give people the option at the end of the tour. I tell people if they would like to come up and tell me a story. I love hearing a good story, especially a good haunted paranormal story. And I also tell them in the middle of the tour that I do write these down. And occasionally, if I have a good story, sometimes I will repeat their story during my tour. In fact, I have a really good one about our dog park that a young man on one of my tours told me at the end of the tour. But I enjoy hearing the stories from people, some from Cincinnati and some from out of town. And I do kind of keep a diary of them, believe it or not. Not all of them are for repeating. I've had some very personal stories told to me, but I really enjoy hearing the stories at the end of the tour.
Okay, you just don't get to say, I have a really good one about the dog park and walk away from that. Not on my show.
Well,
you better tell me about that.
Well, in Washington Park, which used to be, believe it or not, part of the cemeteries here in Cincinnati, we have a new dog park. It was put in back in 2011, 2012. And I had a young man on one of my tours. And at the end of the tour, he came up to me and he said he was at the dog park with himself and some friends and his dog. And the dog went running off into one of the far corners. And they called the dog, wouldn't come back. So finally, he's like, I'm just going to go get the dog. So he walks over to the corner and he said there was an older man kind of leaning up against the fence. And the gentleman started asking this young man some questions, and the young man was very polite, answering the questions. And finally, 2 or 3 minutes went by and the conversation ended. So he got the dog, started walking back to his friends. And he said his friends were all looking at him kind of funny. They're like, what were you doing down there? And the young man's like, well, I was being polite. I was answering the gentleman's questions. And they're like, no, you weren't. You were talking to yourself. There was nobody standing anywhere near you. So that's my dog park story.
That's wonderful. That's
I thought
wonderful.
it was a good story. So I added it to the tour.
Hey, that's gold. That is just gold. Laura, Do you also invite people to share their stories on your tours?
Well, the thing I'm really well known for in our tour company is I'm the guide who hates people. So no, I don't. My boss said on my tombstone, Laura's tombstone will say, "I came here to be alone." And that's absolutely true. So I generally don't invite people to speak to me at all. But people do still like to share. And, you know, I'm not like a total, let's see, we're not supposed to be swearing. I'm not a total horrible person. So what I find is not only do people like to share their own ghost stories, but, and sometimes I just totally don't get the point of that story, but I smile and nod. But what I do enjoy a lot, actually, people who come from out of town to live in Cincinnati always say Cincinnati's like the biggest small town in the world. So I think our greater Cincinnati area, it's probably close to 1 million people, but everybody knows everybody. And if they don't know you, they know your family or something like that. So what happens a lot on my tours is, because we go to a lot of historic sites, we go to a lot of old buildings, we go to, you know, this park that used to be a series of cemeteries, constantly have people on my tours who are in some way connected to our story and the stories that we're telling. The buildings we walk past, the buildings we go into. One of the buildings we walk around a fair bit is on the Queen City is Haunted tour is Cincinnati's Music Hall. It's an absolutely gorgeous building, famous for its architecture, its interior. It's also famous for being one of the 15 most haunted buildings in the country. There are a lot of ghost stories about that one. And, you know, you'll meet people on the tour who've had their own experience at that particular site, or who knows someone who did, or whose uncle did. And so, yeah, I mean, I hear this too, even though I don't actually invite people to tell me.
They tell you anyway. Having heard that we are dealing with the guide that just wants to be left alone, but I know she's one of your top guides, Barbara. Would you tell us, in your opinion, both as a guide and as someone who manages tours and guides, what makes for a great tour?
Oh, I think Laura's very good at this. I don't care what she says, but she's very engaging with people. And you have to be friendly, and she is. She says she isn't, but she is. And she's very knowledgeable. So that's a big thing. I make eye contact. I make sure, you know, I look at everybody. I don't care if I have 50 people on my tour. I make sure I make eye contact with almost everybody on the tour. I try and get them involved. And I know Laura does it too. I've been on several of her tours. She is an excellent tour guide. Very knowledgeable. So I do like to have people engaged as well. I try and get them to at least talk during. It's really funny because at the beginning of the tour, everybody's kind of stoic and they're just standing there and they're staring at you and they're listening to you talk. And one of the very first things I do is during one of the first stops, I yell out, "Bring out your dead!" top of my lungs, so everybody in the neighborhood hears me, and everybody's turning around looking at me, and everybody on my tour is kind of like, "Oh my gosh, did she just do that?" And by the end of the tour, everybody on the tour is talking to me. You know, they're telling me their stories. They're just, you know, they're totally engaged by the end of the tour. I try and get people involved. I try and interact. I ask them questions. I ask them about William Henry Harrison, and I go, you know, he was our 9th president. You all knew that, right? And they all shake their head. No, or they don't know it. I'm like, and they're all shaking their head, yes. I'm like, perfect. So that's what makes, you know, interaction, getting people kind of involved in the stories as well. A good story. I mean, and our backdrop here, like, you know, being in Over the Rhine, oh my gosh, it's a stage set. I mean, you walk around and you see old buildings. You know, there's a reason why Hollywood comes here and films movies. You know, it's there. We don't have to make it up. It's beautiful. We stop in, Music Hall. Oh my gosh, you talk about a beautiful, beautiful old building. And that's my backdrop. I mean, I don't have a stage set. I've got a live one. It's here. So that makes it easy to tell the stories, I think. But yeah, I do like the engagement with people, trying to get them a little bit involved. So.
Cool. So what I'm hearing is respect,
yes,
research, engagement, storytelling, and you know, all of these things do contribute. Now, some of us Well, most of the panel are writers as well as either ghost tour consumers or ghost tour givers or tour givers. And based on my own limited experience in Old Town Alexandria, I found that there was a lot of give and take between what I was doing as a docent in the John Carlisle House and my fiction changed as a result. So I'd like to know, for the writers here, what did you bring to the ghost tours as a writer and shaper of fiction, and what did the tours bring back to you? And I'll ask it slightly differently for you, Gail, but we'll get to you. Don't worry about that. Alledria, I'm going to lead off with you on this one. You know, how did your writing basically affect the way you deliver the ghost tours, and how did actually performing and delivering the ghost tours change the way you wrote? Or did it?
Well, the way I teach how to do ghost tours is I teach basic outlining, which I did not used to do.
Mm-hmm.
But after several months of teaching other people how to figure out the details of a story so that they could tell me the story, I started realizing that, yes, outlining actually does help. So I started outlining more. So that's kind of how those two things traveled together for me. And then my fiction is much more verbal now.
Mm-hmm.
I have to act it out. I have to do the voices. I have to
Perform it.
I have to perform it, because that's how my brain thinks now. It thinks of it as a performance, and I need to do these things in order to be able to get it all down. And getting it all down is the most important thing. So I do the voices, I do the facial expressions, I just do it until I get what I want.
Yep. Laura? There's no wrong answer here, by the way.
I've always been an outliner, and I'm very methodical in how I write, how I think, how I do things. So what I really find with tours is I really want a progression and a build of stories. And fortunately, the company that we work for, they're very respectful of the guides. So they always say, you know, you can tailor the tour to yourself, to your own style, come up with your own jokes if you want. Our rule is if you have a good joke, everybody in the company is allowed to steal it and use it. But if there's a joke you don't like that's in the script, you don't have to use it. And you can rearrange things. We all have to have the same like basic foundational stories and facts. I can't go around making up my own facts or ignoring the main stops or anything. But so I kind of tend to, with all of the scripts, rearrange them in a way that to me makes sense as a logical progression. Like we've talked a little bit about our famous music hall, a beautiful building, one of the 50 most haunted buildings in the country. We have a bunch of stories that we do around music hall. And I don't even remember now the order that they are in the script, but I know when I got the script and read it and started practicing it, we practice a lot before we go out. I rearranged them to what I thought was sort of, you know, an interesting story, all the way up to what I thought was like the most bone-chilling story to end on. So, and I do that with all of the scripts on all of the tours I do, that I will rearrange them and rephrase them in ways that I think give more emphasis and kind of create more tension, which I think is important. And there are some stories on the haunted tour, I don't really get them. And there was one in particular, I said to Barb, I don't get this one. And she said, well, just leave it out then. If you don't get it, don't tell it. And that's really helpful. In terms of writing, I would say the biggest effect it's had on me is it's really made me appreciate my own city. Just being a tour guide in general has really made me appreciate what an interesting city this is and how many stories there are. And it's been really inspiring to me, because I always thought yeah, this is a nice city to live in, but there's no stories here. There's, you wouldn't want fiction here. And I've really totally changed my mind about that and recognized I was just ignorant and dead wrong.
Yeah, it's a great city, but it's not New York, or it's not Savannah, or it's not New Orleans. Yeah, but you'd be surprised what you find in your backyard. I discovered a 19th century grave that's literally in somebody's backyard, one street over.
Mm.
So yeah, you never know what you're going to find. Barbara, you're not yourself a fiction writer, but you have storytellers. How do you use, what sort of storytelling tools do you suggest to your guides? I mean, do you do what Alledria does and suggest they outline it or build their own story?
Well, we have a like Laura said, we have a basic script, and when we first bring new guides in, that's what they get. They get our kind of a basic script of the stories, which are all fantastic, and then as they go along and they get familiar or they get comfortable with these stories, then I add on extra stories. I have several, a whole notebook full of extra stories that I can tell to give to them. They can add on. And like Laura said, if they don't believe in a story, that's a big thing. You have to kind of believe it. You have to be able to tell it and feel it, if that makes sense. So that's why I have some of these little extra stories. I don't know if I answered your question or not.
No. Actually, you did. So that's, like I said, there are no such things as wrong answers. These are just questions to hear your stories on many levels.
Yeah.
So,
I think with regard to what Barb said, and something that I forget who said this, about anything can happen and things change and stuff goes wrong on a tour and so on. And well, Over the Rhine is a really, really busy place, and especially lately with construction and so on, and our routes change all the time. So one of the things as you go along there as a guide and get more comfortable with the tours, you get more and more stories and more information, so that when you suddenly find out, oh, can't do this stop at all tonight, you can still give everybody a really good, really full tour, because you have a whole repertoire of stories after a while, and you can just keep rearranging the tour to make sure everybody gets a good tour, even if they're not getting the tour maybe that 3 hours ago you thought you were going to give them. I also find I really like it when people on a tour ask questions, because when they start asking questions, that tells you what are they most interested in, and you can kind of steer your tour more in the direction of the things they're telling you they're most interested in. A silent group is a lot harder to give a good tour to, in my opinion.
They're a hard crowd. They're a hard crowd. Alledria, before I go to you, Leanna, because I can just see you bursting. I just wanted to ask, have you had, since you are on a trolley most of the time, have you had unexpected things come, to basically interrupt what's going on there as well? Because you think that would be kind of a
I can tell you stories for hours on the ways that tours have gone wrong over the last decade. I mean, there's the night that I broke a shoe. I literally broke a shoe. The heel fell off. We've prepared it with medical tape, and I gave 2 tours that night with a broken shoe. There's the time that the trolley caught fire and everybody thought it was a part of the act. Everybody thought it was part of the act, all the way up until I was like, no,
we need to evacuate.
Leave now. We need to do this thing, because no. But I could tell you lots of stories about how things have gone wrong, about the night that they locked me out and I had to give an entire section of the tour from outside of the building where we were supposed to give it. It's live. I tell people when I train them, you have a set list because you have the idea of what a perfect night is going to look like. The likelihood of a perfect night is almost zero, but you at least have some idea of what it would look like if it happened. You're going to have to figure it out as you go. Just flow, roll with it. And if it becomes that big of a problem that you have to call management, don't be afraid to call management.
Yeah, that's what they're there for. Okay, Leanna, you know, how have ghost tours contributed to your fiction? How have you contributed? How has your fiction contributed to the ghost tours? Not necessarily in that order.
Well, it's interesting because my performative life and my work as a ghost tour guide and just a tour guide in general, all of that was happening while I was first getting my first professional fiction out in the world. And so it really is this entirely syncretic process. And I think what I try to do as a writer is much what I want to do as a tour guide, lead my audience through a space and evoke emotions in them. And so I very much look at my work as a writer as being a tour guide for my readership. And I have to make sure I'm not pausing too long in any one particular moment. That's also something I have to pace out with my editor, because of course I want to tell you every single last detail of everything I know. And that's not going to work for the pacing of your average novel, even if it is a historical novel where you expect lots of historical details. If it's not relevant to the plot and the pacing in the moment, you have to save those details out for later. So I also try to sort of think about my audiences when I'm in person with them and also when I'm on the page with them, and pacing that accordingly. Attention span, really grabbing them visually. I walk the paths of my tours in my mind a lot to kind of think about what I'm looking at and addressing some of my favorite little things as I'm passing by. And so it's the greatest compliment when people read my books. They say that it's very atmospheric and that it's very lived in. And it is, because I choose paths that I'm familiar with. Or if I'm not, then I will make sure I am familiar with them by the time that the book goes out to print, because I want people to feel like I'm truly guiding them through. But it's always an issue of the pacing, because a lot of times I want to put in all of the material I know. But much like with a good tour guide, we always need to know more than we're able to say in a given tour, because of, like what Alledria said, you don't know what's going to happen. That perfect night is probably not going to be the perfect night. And like Laura said, you might have to reroute around construction. So you need to have much more material than you will end up using. That's the same for being a writer. You're going to have to research more than you're going to be able to put on the page, but you can use those other details later, especially when you need them. Say it's book 2 and you realize, oh, there's a plot point I need to fill in. Oh, but here's this cool historical fact that I didn't get to say on my last tour. I'm going to use it here in this book. So I think that constantly having a sense of, okay, what's really needed right now, both for you and your audience and as a guide, and also then on the page, so that it can be this kind of, you're still having a dialogue with an audience, even as a writer.
Gail, you know, basically, how have the ghost tours contributed to your fiction, and how has your fiction or your understanding of storytelling affected your consumption of ghost tours?
Well, I think in terms of how they affect the fiction, one of the things I love about going on ghost tours is I find these details out that I can't find anywhere else. A good ghost tour gives me stuff that isn't on a website somewhere. And so I'm very often making notes on my phone as somebody says something, I go, you know, I can use that. And so that goes onto my notes app, and I usually have a page of notes by the time we're done. So definitely, I want all of my series that are set in different real cities, I want the city to be a character in the book and the stories to be something that couldn't happen the same way anywhere else, because they're very rooted organically in the ghost stories and the urban legends and the scandals and the secrets and all of that stuff that happens in that particular place. So I love getting those details. It makes it more real, because some reader out there is going to have heard that and they're going to go, oh, she did her homework. And that's what I want. I think one of the things that I've become very aware of in looking at ghost stories across the board is that we are telling stories about the dead, but we're telling stories that are relevant to the living. And the stories that we tell, you know, Leanna talked about, there's some hard history there. My Deadly Curiosities series is set in Charleston, and I talk about it being a glittering city built over rivers of blood because it has a terrible history. And I think a lot of the stories that still captivate us, there's so many people among the dead that we've forgotten, you know, but the stories that live on are the ones where we're still kind of uneasy. There's still some friction there, and usually they have to do with someone who didn't fit in, a woman who transgressed social boundaries or was believed to have, someone who was in the wrong place at the wrong time for who they were and where they were expected to be. And those are relevant issues. And so I think that's the humanity underneath the ghost stories that makes us want to keep telling them, because we're still looking for an answer through the vehicle of this person who may or may not have actually ever lived, but their legend is a cautionary tale or an instructive tale. There's a lot of morality play in ghost stories. Don't do this or you won't get to go to heaven, whatever it is. So I think that's the big takeaway I've kind of learned over the years.
Okay. Well, this has been fascinating, and I would just love to hear everybody's experiences, both as, you know, consumers of tours and also as storytellers and tour guides. I wish I could be on all of your tours right now. I'm sorry we're all stuck at home, but I hope that this gives our folks at home a little taste of what's out there and a little taste of what we can look forward to in the future. And so, but we're coming up against the end of our time, so I'm going to ask everybody quickly to let us know what you're working on or what you're publishing now and where people can find you on the web. Gail, I'm going to start with you.
Well, we've got new books coming out, both under the Gail Z. Martin name and the Morgan Bryce name. And I'm easy to find as Gail Z. Martin or Morgan Bryce. Make sure you have the Z with the Gail. Make sure you spell Bryce, B-R-I-C-E. And all of my social media sites and websites are under those names. So I'm pretty easy to find.
Okay, cool. Laura?
My website is lauraresnick.com. You can find me very easily on Facebook, and I'm pretty active there. And you can find our tour company at American Legacy Tours. I'm writing my next book and guiding underground tours, and I don't know whether or not I'm going to be doing the haunted tours this year because with the pandemic, everything's kind of quiet this year.
And I believe you're also participating in an anthology.
Yes, that you're in.
Yes.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I was
Modern
thinking,
Deities
I got a
Guide.
story this week because now it's funded. Yeah.
Yeah, we're on the hook to write those stories.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Modern Deities Guide for Surviving Humanity. Anthologies of Zombies Need Brains. Look for it in 2021. Anyway, Alledria.
You can find me easily at alledriahurt.com. That's ALLEDRIAHURT.com. And most of my social media can be found under Linktree. That's linktr.ee/Alledria.
Oh, okay, cool. And you were saying 20 books you've written? Did I hear that right?
I counted like last week when I did when I redid my books page. I have 7 anthology pieces out and 20 pieces between 5,000 words and 100,000 words.
And so what's the most recently published work that people can find?
Actually, I have 3 pieces coming out in October.
Okay, tell us about that.
I have 3 pieces coming out in October. I have a short story coming out in Slay, Stories of the Vampire Noir, edited by Nicole Givens-Kurtz. I have a anthology piece called The Black Rock in Valhalla Books the Devil's Due. And then I have a book coming out from Mocha Memoirs Press called Alice.
Cool. Well, we'll all look forward to that. That's great. Barbara, okay, where can folks find you? And, you know, if you want to repeat, AmericanLegacyTours.com, that's okay too. And tell us, you know, what is the current tour? I mean, can we expect the tour of the Emory Theater?
Well, yes, you can find me at American Legacy Tours as well. We are doing tours, just tours of the Emory from time to time, but we're doing public investigations September 19th and October 30th will be our first two, and hopefully we'll be doing more after that. We're actually going to come into the building, tell you a little bit of the history of the building, and then kind of let you loose to do your own little kind of ghost investigations. You can find some of my investigations. I'm with a group here in Cincinnati called Cincy Ghost Guys. So cincyghostguys.com, and you can kind of find some of our adventures here in Cincinnati and other places throughout the country. So if you're interested in that.
That's very cool. And thanks again for letting us tour the theater with you. Leanna, okay, tell us where we can find you and what's coming out.
Okay, so LeannaReneeHieber.com. My latest book is the third in my Spectral City series. So if you just Google the Spectral City, that trilogy will come up. Summoning of Souls is the latest, that completes the trilogy. My debut saga, the Strangely Beautiful saga, is actually on sale, all 4 books. Macmillan and Tor Books is running a sale for the next several months. All 4 of my Strangely Beautiful books are only $2.99 in ebook. So if you look for the Strangely Beautiful saga, wherever you get ebooks, that will get the entire saga full of ghosts and authentic London ghost stories in there. I work for Boroughs of the Dead. So if you go to boroughsofthedead.com, you can see our virtual tour offerings. We'll be putting up our fall list soon. And along with my boss and the owner of Boroughs of the Dead, her and I will be announcing a cool nonfiction book about ghosts that I can't say too much more yet because the publisher's marketplace announcement hasn't gone up yet, but there'll be a nonfiction book about ghosts that are going to cover some of the things that I've talked about and that we've all talked about coming up. And I'll also be in an upcoming anthology called Winter's Tale from the New Pavon Press. I wrote a sequel to Edgar Allan Poe's The Oval Portrait, which is one of my favorite Poe stories. And I was really excited to write in the vein and the manner of one of my favorite authors of all time. So I'm most active on, in terms of social media, I'm most active on Twitter at Leanna Renee.
Okay, cool. Well, thank you all. This has been a wonderful little over an hour. Wish we could go longer. And I hope you'll join us here at Continual once again. And I hope everyone out in the audience has enjoyed our time with these wonderful purveyors of ghost stories, ghost tours, and all the rest. So if you enjoyed what you saw, please like, share, follow, and subscribe. Thank you for Continual, the never-ending convention.